Hi there, my name is Atkinson. I'm a specialist autism mentor at De Montfort University, and in this presentation I'll be talking to you about low mood, how it affects us, as well as how to recognise it, and then some tips and strategies to try and help improve things for yourself if or when it materialises. So it is important to recognise before we start today's session that this presentation is not professional mental health support, and we would always recommend you to access your GP and other services, which I'll highlight at the end of the session if you're struggling with your mental health. Okay. So let's have a look at the contents today. So we're going to look at some key terms and definitions in terms of recognizing what low mood is. We're going to look at how and when low mood can develop, and then look at the correlation at times between autism and challenges with mental health. We'll look at some short and long-term strategies, as well as looking at physical health and mental health and the stigma there. As well as this, we'll look at thought patterns and how we ruminate sometimes when we're feeling low mood. And we're then going to move on to how to respond, as well as some strategies and suggestions. I'll then finish off the session with a few useful numbers and contacts and some general signposts. Okay. So let's look at some terms associated with low mood. So here's a number of examples of the sorts of feelings that can be associated with feeling low moods. Okay. So as you can see, there are a significant number of words we may use to describe low mood. And this list is most certainly not exhaustive either. It's important to highlight just how many different emotions we can feel, as when we feel low, it can be hard to see through the fog and create a path forward for ourselves. So one of the most important things to do is to try and identify your emotions and establish where they're coming from. What is it you're feeling? And think of some reasons why. A plan to self-help is then a good place to start, and we will run through some strategies and suggestions later on in this session. So in the context of autism, with an association with things such as alexithymia and empathic attunement and challenges with executive skills, this can bring additional difficulties for autistic people in terms of recognizing and regulating emotions. So it's a good idea to start building yourself a toolkit to refer to when tackling low mood, which I hope you will be able to establish come the end of this session. Okay, so let's have a look at some important reminders then. So before we start, try to consider a few of these important factors when we go through the slides. As I imagine all of us can relate to some of them, or some or all of these points, or will have done at some stage in our lives. Okay, so first one is that too many struggle and never tell a soul. So it goes without saying this is the case. Many do not instinctively reach out or talk when struggling. Are you the sort of person perhaps who feels they're good at being there for others and supporting them, but possibly struggle to open up yourself a little bit? So if so, it really is time to reflect on this and consider support networks as a two-way street. So you're not a burden in the same way, you know, if other people come to you, you don't find them a burden. You're happy to help them. So you need to start considering your support network, if it is a support network, as a two-way sort of street in that sense. So our instincts when feeling low can be to mask, push, hide and avoid. And I think while some downtime can be good and some sort of time away from things, avoidance overall in the long term is not a long-term strategy, I suppose. So we will explore some ways around this later on in the session. So people focus too hard on meeting expectations or comparing. So it is natural to self-deprecate when experiencing low mood, and feelings such as sort of failing yourself or others, or constantly comparing yourself to others, they can materialize, these feelings. So it's important to recognize and question them and not just let them ruminate. And we'll talk about ruminating a little bit later on as well. So too many feel change is not possible, so they don't try, but it is possible. Change is possible, but it can often take a lot of planning and some dedication, which can feel overwhelming. It's also important to recognise it doesn't happen overnight, and never underestimate the sort of benefits of progress, no matter how small. There's something I read which stuck with me once, was that we too often focus on not wanting to feel a certain way, but we never stop to consider how it is that we actually want to feel. So essentially, we will continue to struggle if we do not give ourselves sort of any direction. So what we're trying to say here is that we often sort of feel, I don't want to feel this way anymore, without actually setting any expectations or goals as to how we would quite like to feel. So we may feel a little bit lost. And just remember as well that bad days are okay. We will all experience them, but it's obviously important to recognise when low mood doesn't shift and react to this. So this isn't to sort of start panicking if we have a couple of days where we feel down. I think We all experience that at times, but it's important to sort of recognise a pattern here. So where do you start? So importantly, you do need to build yourself a toolbox or self-help to refer back to when your mood slips. Okay, so this is really important. So I guess a suggestion, this is what works for me. So I build a lot of lists because that's just something I enjoy doing and it works for me. And I build lists of things to refer to, so such as things to get done, sort of a to-do list, or things that make me happy. So I can look at my list and remember. Sometimes when you're feeling the fog, you don't remember what makes you happy. So I'll have a list of things that I remember to do if it makes me happy. I'll also create a list of things I'm looking forward to as well. That's quite a big one for me. I find it gives me more direction and purpose to what I'm doing, and having something to look forward to, no matter how big or small, can be quite motivating. So what it also does, it distracts my mind from rumination. So aside from setting goals or writing to-do list, it stops me ruminating, and it's distracting my mind because I've got a pen and paper in hand and I'm making some form of plan, I guess. It reminds me of all the enjoyable things, essentially in black and white on pen and paper. So rather than trying to reach sort of through the fog on bad days, and this is just a suggestion, you may find your own ways to build a go-to toolbox when you're feeling down, and hopefully you'll be able to build something from this session. So recognise the mood cycle as well, and be aware of where you can intervene. Now, I'm not going to talk about this here because I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on in the session. And we want to locate the low mood at its root cause, be proactive and not reactive. So it's also important to recognise the root of the low mood. All right, so people perhaps write your thoughts down or create a journal, something like that, and make a plan to address the things that are causing you to feel low. Not all low moods are explainable, and that can be hard for many, but if you start sort of writing things down and addressing things, it gives you a better chance of exploring this. So essentially what we're saying here, as I've said, just with the starred and in bold, is that we want to build awareness. We need to build awareness of ourselves to be able to react to it. So we'll explore throughout this session ways we can implement strategies to overcome, or rather than overcome, it's not always possible to fully overcome these things. So let's say we're going to try and manage our low moods. So physical versus mental health. So this is something that I've spoken quite a lot with my students when discussing why people don't understand their mental health struggles or internal challenges with any autistic traits. So this is, when people feel I'm not understood, people aren't checking in on me, all these sorts of things. And one thing that always strikes to me is that a lot, of forms of physical health can be much more obvious to the eye. Not all forms, obviously, but some. And there is often a set plan of care or rehabilitation or recovery to understand and work from with physical health. So low mood can often be invisible or well masked. So let's say, for example, that your friend sort of walked in with a broken arm. We would naturally respond by asking them how it happened, what they did, how they're doing, how long they'll have to have a cast on for, all these sorts of things. But what I really want us to think about here is, if like I say, I've had people on crutches or with casts on, it's quite an obvious thing to go, oh, how did you do that? Oh, are you feeling okay? Are you walking all right? But do we do this if someone's looking sad? Do we check in on our friends if they seem a little bit quieter or more withdrawn than usual? So I think it's just something to reflect on there. Is it as natural? So as I said, stigmas can prevent people from looking after their mental health in the same way they might their physical health. If you had a physical pain which wasn't improving, would you do something about it? And I think most of us would agree that we would. If we had a bad back, or we were suffering from migraines or things like this, we would do something about it. We'd go to the GP, or we'd set a plan of recovery for ourselves, or we would take something that would help us with that. Mental health is no different. So left untreated, the low mood can develop into more serious or even debilitating conditions, just in the same way that physical health can. So one thing to take from this slide, I guess, is please prioritize your mental health in the same way as you would your physical health. So we're going to have a look at autism and low moods now. So I would probably say that quite a lot of these things will be quite familiar to a lot of people that will watch this. Okay, so things such as sensory overload and masking, challenges in certain communication styles, or even frustrations with this, perfectionism, anxiety, all sorts of words that you can or may have related to at some point in your life. So essentially what we are actually saying here is that whilst being autistic in itself is not a catalyst to low mood, as you can see, there are a number of factors here to consider, such as those listed, which can affect our mood. So it's important to recognise those we are affected by and react, as it may be that they are contributing to our well-being. So naturally, like I say, being autistic in itself is not a catalyst to experiencing low mood. But if you're experiencing one or more, or even most of the things listed here, then it's very sort of it's going to correlate with low mood or sort of anxiety, because essentially we're going to feel overwhelmed and overloaded with things. So really important to recognize and react as well to these traits that we struggle with that can be associated with autism. So the cycle of low mood. So as with anything we feel, I guess, in a rut with, or things that we find hard, it can often come in the form of a cycle that we find really hard to break. So the longer we are in the cycle, the harder it can be to break, and sometimes the more daunting it can feel as well when things have gone on too long. Personally, I can't overstate the importance of finding the courage to break this cycle. I know just saying that doesn't make it easy, and we've all seen many diagrams like this in the past where it's like, well, where do I start? What do I actually do? But I've chosen to use this example so you can take a look at it and consider sort of which stage you feel that you find the hardest to manage, or perhaps where a good place to start with would be. So we're feeling the pain of low mood, so we come into the next phase here, which is feeling less active and take more rest. As a result, that gives us lower energy and fatigue, and things like muscles become weaker. We then have, because we're ruminating and sad, we're having unhelpful thoughts, feeling of hopelessness or feeling overwhelmed, which can then lead to sort of longer periods of low mood or even depression. And as you can see, there's no real area in this cycle where it can just be broken pretty quickly. But generally, we have to be brave to break these cycles, create plans, get more fresh air, reach out to more people, seek help when you need it, that sort of thing. So take a look at that and see what sort of plan you think you could make to try and break that cycle, even if it's just a little bit. So we're going to look at responding to low mood now. So essentially what I want you to do here really is write some lists. So take a few moments, and I'll pause for a moment, or you can pause the presentation. So really think about what actions you take when you were responding to low mood, and do they make you happy? I personally have had a lot of reflections on this in my life over the last sort of 4 to 5 years, I would say. You know, the things I was doing that I thought were making me happy sometimes probably weren't, and the things that I was quite daunted by, I realized that do make me really happy. So again, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to step out of your sort of comfort zones. You know, so you can see here that all of these images are things that many people will do. So some will turn to things like alcohol, some will just want to sleep more, some will impulsively spend more to try and help them feel better. Some people will be sort of gaming, or spending a lot of hours doing in front of screens, and some people will go out for a walk or exercise. Now, most of these have advantages and disadvantages to them. Generally, it's really important at this stage to form a response. So if we are not responding to our periods of low mood and allowing rumination, then they can develop into more serious conditions, essentially. So people, like I say, respond in lots of different ways to low mood. I know, again, I've done healthy and unhealthy things in the past. I imagine the vast majority of us can relate to at least some of these images on here. So all the images can be, like I say, they have advantages and disadvantages depending on how you apply them, in what context we engage in them. It's important to sort of distinguish, what's short term and what's long term, because I'm going to talk to you about that in the next slide, and that's really important. All of these things could be short term fixes, and all of these things could be long term fixes. And it's essential that we emphasize the importance of long-term fixes. So if you look at the person sleeping there, that could be beneficial and sort of harmful. If you needed a little nap because you're tired and just need a bit of downtime, I don't see anything wrong with that. But if we're sleeping for copious hours of the day and missing out on life experiences and things, then that's obviously a little bit more challenging. Same with spending. Everyone's allowed to treat themselves once in a while to something, but if we're harming our finances through trying to make ourselves feel better, again, we've got to think of advantages and disadvantages of all these things. You know, gaming certainly something that makes me very happy, but I'd be conscious if I was doing this day in, day out, and not getting fresh air or making real connections with people, then it's probably something I need to look at. So it's just important to build a bit of a profile of yourself here. So have a think and write down what sort of things make you happy, and are they short-term benefits or long-term benefits? So referring back to the previous slide, the go-tos when feeling low can be considered short and long-term depending on how we implement them and in what context we engage in them. So it's important that we recognize the difference between short and long-term fixes, and it's vital to prioritize long over short-term. Short-term sort of fixes will provide temporary relief. Of course they will. Some people like to go out for a drink. Some people spend a lot of money on something that they've wanted for a while. Some people may scroll for a long while. Okay, it might feel okay at the time because you're sort of shutting the world out and you're in your own area, but they're not really sort of long-term goals. I know some people will, you know, like for example, eat a lot of chocolate or buy a takeaway. Everyone likes a treat, but if these are always your go-tos, it's probably time to think about some long-term stuff. So the long-term helps with your future self and being able to manage the bad days. So essentially, this is what I'm talking about in terms of building a toolkit to deal with your feelings. So I'm going to ask you again here to take a little bit of time to reflect. So grab a bit of pen and paper if you want to, because I think this is really important, again, because to be able to act on all this stuff, we have to know ourselves, you know, and we have to build ourselves a profile and consider where we need to sort of make, you know, try and get a little bit better in life at. So when you're feeling extremely low, consider what happens to you in relation to the following 4 points. So I want you to sort of grid on a piece of paper and write 4 separate headings in 4 separate boxes of your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, and your physical sensations. What this does is it helps us identify when feelings of low mood are on the horizon, okay? And it makes us understand how we react, because low mood and anxiety and lots of other different things in life are going to be very unique and individual to that particular person. So there is no one size fits all way of me delivering this presentation to say if everybody does this and everybody feels like this, then we can sort of all do this or feel like that. It doesn't work like that. So you need to build a personal profile and understand yourself. So again, I'd recommend pausing the presentation here and consider your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and physical sensations when you're feeling low. So what happens to you? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Okay. So here are some thought patterns, okay, so they may deter you from the reality of many scenarios and events in your life when you're feeling low. So it's giving a false pretense of, you know, it's giving you a false sense of what the reality of the situation is, essentially. So not addressing your low mood and allowing rumination to settle can cause you to catastrophize, for example, or lower your confidence and reduce self-esteem. So thought patterns which can contribute to this include the following on here. So we might start mind reading others' thoughts and trying to create a level of certainty in our life from that. We might seek lots and lots of reassurance. Do we constantly need to ask people, is it going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? Are we going to be okay? These sorts of things. As well as that, you have sort of egocentric thinking and emotional reasoning that come in. So there's lots of playing over things in our mind a lot and trying to make sense of things. There can be the sense of all or nothing thinking, which can be quite damaging if we're trying to make improvements, because we need to recognize that that building back from periods of low mood or feeling extremely down, it takes small progress and small steps. So if we're sort of going to go all or nothing thinking, and I know people do this with things like exercise plans or diets or university work, lots of different things where it has to be all or nothing. Whereas if we take things a little bit steadier and manage things to build over time, it can really help. I think it goes without saying that we will overgeneralize or catastrophize certain situations, so things will always feel like there's going to be a worse outcome if we're feeling low. And we add musts and shoulds to our life rather than considerations and taking holistic approaches to things. It's also harder to filter certain things when we're feeling low, and we can often seek a lot of validation for a lot of things when we're feeling quite vulnerable or down. So what these are is generally it's an idea of thought patterns when we're feeling low. So again, it's identifying those low moods. If we are doing these things or we can relate to these things, it's time to sort of step back and have a look. Hopefully you're not doing all of these things. So perhaps pick a couple of these things that you think, yeah, I definitely do that. This is something I need to work on, and chat to someone about it, whether it be a mentor or a therapist or a friend, family member, tutor, whoever you have in your life. You want to maybe talk a little bit about these things and how they impact you, and even do a bit of research and have a look at ways of overcoming these things, because a lot of these things, like I say, they'll give you a false sense of reality of what the situation is, especially things like catastrophizing, when we think things are going to be far worse and predicting far worse outcomes than the reality of the situation is. So have a think about those and see and consider to yourself how you can put some steps in place to sort of manage these. So remember, you will not be able to put anything in place permanently to prevent negative thoughts appearing. So this is really important, that we are, regardless of all this stuff, there are going to be days when we fall short, or we get things wrong, or we just don't feel well enough to do things, and that's okay. So there's no permanent fix to this stuff. It's about building a toolbox and managing things a little bit better than we were. And the key thing to remember is to recognize that and manage and build resilience when we feel low moods coming on. Okay, so building emotional resilience is key. We can all be guilty of going into autopilot as well and doing unhelpful things when low moods are present. Check your processes and respond. Okay, we all do this. I've done it. I still do it. It could be a Saturday morning and there's no plan to the day, and before long, 3 or 4 hours have passed without really doing anything. But I find as soon as I've got up, made a bit of a plan, gone into a different room, got some fresh air, the world just feels a little bit better. It doesn't solve everything, but it feels a little bit better when you're a bit more active. So just check that we're not going into autopilot. And if we do need that a bit of time to scroll or read or do whatever you're doing, set a time limit on it, rather than having an undefined period of time where you're perhaps lying on the sofa, doing whatever it is you're doing. Have a bit of a boundary and a time limit to that. So you say, okay, I'm gonna take my time here, and in an hour or two, I'm gonna get up and do this. It gives you a bit of a plan and a bit of a purpose to the day at that point. So here are some thoughts and feelings. So the most important piece of advice for me personally, and this is something that I read, is that, and it's always stuck with me actually, is that, and to remember that your thoughts and your feelings are never facts. Okay, so how we think and feel about something are rarely facts. And we came up with some words here as to what actually in reality they are. So they are opinions, they're predictions, theories, stories. They can sometimes be judgments and preconceptions. They are ideas, and sometimes even we get them from memories. And they are, and most importantly, I think, is our interpretation of something. And as we've explored in past slides, the reality of what we're interpreting doesn't always fit with what it actually is. And when we're feeling low, we will ruminate and catastrophize a lot more. So do remember that how we feel and think about ourselves actually in reality is probably rarely the reality of the situation. So when negative thoughts arise, whilst it's easier said than done, try to distance yourself from them a little bit. And it's to remind yourself that perceptions, feelings of thought and thoughts are not facts and often aren't the reality of the scenario. So let's have a little chat about rumination. We've used this word quite a lot. So what is rumination? We've mentioned rumination quite a bit through the presentation, and it is the process of churning our thoughts and feelings over and over and over in our head. So when experiencing low moods, these thoughts are more likely to be negative. This will prolong and intensify sadness. So how do we stop ruminating in the moment? So, and I'll put some tips here. Again, these aren't exhaustive. There's probably lots of things you could think of, but these are just 5 suggestions that I've come up with here. So actively say no with a firm hand. Don't just allow yourself to self-deprecate and be self-critical and over worry about it. Just actively say no with a firm hand to yourself. I know it sounds a bit daft maybe, but it can help. And then perhaps change your environment, whether it be to go to the kitchen to cook, or to go and do a little chore in a different room, go out for a walk, or walk around your house and reach out to somebody. Do something that gets you out of that sort of bubble of, well, possibly sadness or rumination. Try and break the cycle. Reach out to a friend. I've mentioned this one. So even if you feel like you're struggling to make sense of things yourself at the minute, there's no harm in reaching out to someone else. Don't feel like an imposter because you haven't got it all figured out right now, that you can't help or be there for someone else, check in with a couple of people. Again, it might give you a boost. Change the activity you are doing. If you're ruminating and you're feeling sad, then whatever you are doing at the time, it goes without saying, isn't working for you. It might work sometimes, but right then it isn't working for you. So change the activity you're doing, even if it's just for a little bit. And also consider your best days. So this comes back to the list writing, as I said earlier a little bit as well. So consider, you might have had a good weekend last weekend and you're really not feeling it this weekend. Consider what you were doing last weekend. It's not always affordable to repeat everything that we do, and it's not always possible, but there might just have been elements of that weekend that you enjoyed and thought, yeah, I could go back to that coffee shop. That, the person that served me was really nice there. I found a nice spot. Lots of different things you can consider, but what made previous weekends or previous days happier for you? And is there any sort of element of them that you can implement today to try and help you feel a little bit better about things? So now we're going to move on to what is known as the 5 basics, and I've used this quite a lot in my sessions as well with students, and it's something that I took from a fabulous book which I'll talk to you a little bit later about. Okay, so it can be easily sort of off-putting to have a look at these and self-create the idea that it has to be all or nothing. So try to improve your confidence and outcomes by starting small and create achievable plans and goals to enhance your well-being. Perhaps consider one small change in each area for next week and see how you get on. This is something I often refer back to myself when I'm struggling, the 5 basics. It always seems to improve my well-being and mood, and to create some little goals on these 5 basics. So what we have to remember is the ingredients that go in will determine what comes out, and it's essential the following 5 basics are looked after. So if we are looking at these 5 and think that we need perfect sleep, a totally sort of stringent and balanced diet, or that we need to sort of start going to the gym every day and exercising all the time, this is not what we're saying from this, okay? Sometimes when you're feeling like you've got to start small, so consider one small change for all 5 of these things for next week. It's my absolute go-to. If at a weekend I'm struggling, I will do one thing, sometimes more, but as a bare minimum, I'll pick one thing on each of this list to do. So one thing that will impact my sleep in a positive way, one thing that I will be pleased with in terms of nutrition, whether that's just a meal prep or something like that. One thing regarding exercise, if I'm injured or not mentally up for exercising that much, I will set my target small. I'll say I'm going out for a 30-minute walk. Something is better than nothing, okay? And then the same with routine and social communication. I may reach out to one friend, something like that, or make an adaptation to my routine that I think is healthy for me. So really consider those. You can refer back to them anytime. You can daily, weekly, monthly. They are really good things. If you're making small positive changes to those things, it gives you a much better chance of feeling a bit better about stuff. And it's not linear, okay? So humans do not grow by constantly improving day by day. Expect setbacks when trying to make improvements and achieve goals. So this graph is not the reality. We're not going to progress in that way. And sometimes so it's easy to give up and think we can't improve our moods if we had bad days or setbacks. But that's the reality of life. You may still be going in the right direction, even with the bad days. So, we will have dips, and that doesn't mean that you're failing at your new goals or your new strategy, or, trying to improve yourself. It just means that you're a human being and you're going to experience these things. So again, it comes back to the all or nothing thinking that we're talking about earlier, which isn't actually particularly healthy in this instance. We need to recognize that we are still growing as human beings and getting better despite having bad days, okay? And that's really important. So this is just my suggestions, okay? So this is nothing other than my suggestions. So list out things that you enjoy and things that help with your well-being, so you can recall them and act on them when feeling down and finding it hard to see through the fog. So list out things that you're looking forward to as well. It can help give you purpose, and it creates an outlook going forward rather than dwelling on the present mood. When you're in a slump, do a different activity. Get up and move, get fresh air, cook, make a plan, anything instead of ruminating to distract the mind. So write your thoughts down. Sometimes doing this can make you realize where the low moods are generating from. So and sometimes as well, you can get into the flow and it can give you a new hobby and purpose to the day. I've certainly enjoyed journaling in the past. I don't do it right now, but it certainly has helped me in the past, and I've really enjoyed doing it. And it's surprising once you get going with it how much you sort of have to say about yourself, and it can be quite interesting and self-revealing as well in a positive way. So low mood can lead to feelings of prolonged anxiety. Okay, so the longer we are perhaps withdrawn or feeling low, we can then feel anxious about getting back into things, of course, especially if our moods are affecting our confidence and self-esteem. So again, taken from a number of different places, here are some ideas for coping with sudden feelings of panic or anxiety. A couple of my favorite ones are hand on heart or hand to hand. So hand on heart is one where you will put your fist on your heart, and you will just apply a little bit of pressure, close your eyes, and can try and control your breathing, feeling the warmth from your arm and your veins go into your heart, just being kind to yourself essentially. So a bit of pressure on that can help with grounding. Hand to hand is one of my favorite ones, and this is where, and I think this is a really good one as well in the context of autism on a sensory side. This has to be done obviously with a trusted person, someone you know, but I find applying pressure to someone else's hand like that is very, very calming. What you can sit and sort of close your eyes and imagine feelings being transferred through there and offloading. Even if you don't always find the words, you feel like you're offloading some of your stress to someone else without even saying any words. Sometimes it's very relaxing, and it can be very grounding at the same time. So environmental grounding, or what's more commonly known as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is when we control our breathing and we try and ground ourselves within the environment we're around. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 means to try and regulate yourself, you want to look for 5 things that you can see and sort of explore them in detail, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Okay, so what that aims to do is sort of ground you back into the environment. These are very helpful things in things like panic attacks, where we perhaps are losing our sense of reality, and it brings us back round a little bit. And then 7-11 breathing, many of you may have heard of this one. It's a pretty simple case of breathe in for 7 seconds and breathe out for 11 seconds. Sorry. An important thing I think on this one is to actually sort of really physically count the seconds you're doing it. It's a good distraction tool from the panic. So just trying to get your breathing under control while panicking, it can be really hard. So actually count the seconds, because it's actually quite hard sometimes when you first try and do this to get the seconds in. So you're almost giving yourself a little challenge while you do this, and by doing that, you're distracting yourself from the more irrational or losing touch of reality-based sort of thoughts, and you're doing a new task essentially. And my absolute favorite is do nothing for 10 minutes. And this is a very good one, I think, for the mornings, and only when you have the time for it. We've all got up in the morning and felt anxious and panicky about something. And we've all got up and then not been able to find something, or, you burnt your toast. And the thing is, when you're going through these processes and you're feeling anxious about something, the more you try and speed up and the more you try and do, the more things are going to go wrong. You sort of, your heart rate might be going, you might be feeling clammy, you might be feeling more panicky. I think it's really important, as long as we have the time, obviously, and resources, to actually quite simply set an alarm on your phone for 10 minutes time. Sit there and breathe and relax. Okay. We talk about breaking the cycle. That's a way to do it. We've all been there, where we've a string of events. We've got to the place we've been, and the first thing we'll say is, "Oh my God, what a morning I've had," or that sort of thing. But actually, that morning you had may not have quite turned out that way if we'd have just taken time to stop and pause for 10 minutes. Okay. General things that can help. So if you're talking about if we're talking about lists and getting lists together, then some of these things are going to be quite useful. You might find them quite useful to get started with. Okay, so these are just general suggestions on what could help with your low moods or mental health in general. Everything from mindfulness and exercise to sort of genuine acts of kindness or charity work. Again, we've added the making lists and plans, gratitude practice, even visiting your GP is a practical measure as well. Improving sensory environment, I think that's particularly important for those with autism, as this can certainly something that impacts me if it's not right. And then other generic things such as tidying and cleaning, or doing some calm activities. So feel free to take all of these from here and add them to your list if you think they would help you, and then you can build a toolkit for yourself to refer to when you're feeling low. Okay. So we're coming to the close now. So important reminders: when in a mood slump or feeling depressed, remember to consider what you do want, not just what you don't want. Having a focus for the future is a stepping stone to improving your mood. And remember, you might not feel or see progress in yourself when you make changes. This is because sort of progress can be really slow and it's not always tangibly measurable. It doesn't mean you aren't making progress just because you can't see it happening. Okay. Don't write off new routines, mindsets, or ways of living if you don't get it right from time to time or even the first time. Focus on good decisions over perfect decisions, as well as realistic goal setting. And then just to finish off, I've got some useful numbers, contacts, signposting at the end, things like that for you. So if you find that your mood is not improving despite sort of applying some of these measures and your own measures, and you feel that you may need to speak to someone about this, remember there is a lot of help out there. So here are some useful contacts. Put them all in one file or on your phone or something, so you've got access to them all. The central point of access, which is an NHS service for urgent help if in crisis. If you're struggling with your mental health and want to reach out to someone, then the SMS Shout text service and Samaritans are both really useful resources. And then internally at De Montfort University, I've left our email address within the Autism team, as well as our wellbeing team's email address. So I just wanted to mention as well, this book is an excellent read. So it is really, really important to note that some of the information presented to you here was based on a book by somebody called Dr. Julie Smith. And it's called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? I'm sure many watching this will have seen this very colourful book in the shops before. I read it, and it really is fantastic for a number of areas of sort of life's ups and downs. So the chapter on tackling low mood, which I've used some information from in this, is an excellent read, and I would highly recommend the book to anybody looking for tools to tackle what life can throw at you. And then finally, thank you very much for watching again. We'll be back soon with another life hack session. Again, thanks for watching, really appreciate it. And hope you've taken something from this. And again, here is some signposting. These are all internal services at De Montfort University, so either screenshot this or take a picture. It's quite a good summary of some of the support networks we have at De Montfort University. But thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.